mic, please.
It seems there are almost as many definitions of atheism as there are those of us who profess to be atheists. Well, not entirely true, but nevertheless, there is a little bit of diversity among opinions of atheists about what it means to be an atheist and how people came to become atheists. We're going to talk about that here on the Atheist Forum. Ed Golly, joined on the set by Joe Reinhardt.
Thank you, Ed.
Joe, I think the best place to start with a definition is the dictionary, at least to me, and I like it because it's simple and concise, and I nearly agree with it in entirety. It simply says one who denies the existence of God. The problem with it to me is it presumes a singular God, when in fact there are, some 20,000 or more?
There are 10,000 different religions, but there are an untold number of gods. There are over 1 billion Hindus, I think, and there are more gods in Hinduism than there are Hindus, so that'll give you an idea how many gods there are.
So if it says one who denies the existence of all gods, I'd like that a little bit better. But I can't take it up with the authors of the dictionary. They're not around anymore. They don't even print these things anymore. Oops. So anyway,
that's one of the
shows
reasons.
what they. Yes. So much for the dictionary. Now, Joe, your definition's a little different than mine in that I've heard you say that you don't see evidence of a God, as opposed to my perception that all gods are inventions of people, of our ancestors, created to try to explain how we came into being, how the universe came into being, how life itself turned into what we experience today.
Well, that's true, Ed. It's a slight difference in opinion on the exact definition of the word itself, but I think where it really comes into play is that believers in particular will assert, based on the dictionary definition that you read, that since we deny the existence of a deity, we must have some proof that there is no deity. And since it's impossible to prove a negative, of course, I don't have any proof that there is no deity, other than the fact that the evidence on the subject doesn't quite come up to the same level as the evidence on the question of werewolves. Nevertheless, it's a point that we get taken to task quite often by believers because it gets us off the subject. We have to spend a good deal of time discussing how, no, we don't actually believe that we know each and everything that ever occurred in the entire history of the universe. And so I think the definition should clarify that it is not just a denial of the existence of a deity, but a denial based on the evidence that's provided.
But isn't the only evidence really what can be found in the stories of all these gods, in the Bibles, the Korans, and if we examine that and see that it clearly was written by people who thought the world is flat, who thought that they were on a planet much the same as this table sits here on the room, in the room, and had no understanding of what they were looking at in the sky, what astronomy was, what clouds were, how they lived, what caused disease, and so on. So when we appraise what they looked at and wrote about and invented as an explanation for this, we can see that the explanation doesn't hold any water with what we know now about the world. Everything pretty much boiled down to it's God's will, because they didn't understand any other reason for anything from a thunderstorm to a common cold. And now that we have a much better understanding of that, we realize they were simply wrong. So can't we just throw out the whole equation of the concept of God, the very word itself, as being something invented by our ancestors to offer explanations for things they couldn't understand?
Well, certainly the province of the divine is shrinking moment by moment. As you pointed out, at one time, virtually every phenomena on the earth was thought to have some supernatural connection, and as we began to be able to explain things like the cause of thunder or the nature of the universe and the manner in which the planets revolve around the sun rather than vice versa, and so on and so forth. So religion is shrinking for that for that very reason. But it's interesting. It's a little bit like trying to hold mercury. You know, it changes moment to moment. If you point out some atrocity in the Bible, Christians will say things like, well, you know, no true Christian would actually throw 32,000 virgins to the troops. So whatever are the unpleasant things about belief, they seem to change to suit the situation in order to perpetuate the belief. It has little or nothing to do with the fact of the matter. I think it was the TV doctor House who said that you know, if you could reason with believers, there wouldn't be any believers. So it's more on a level of an emotional level rather than a rational level. But they're pretty keen to defend it, and that's why it's important that we as atheists define atheism rather than let the believing community define atheism and non-belief, because a couple of years ago, every Friday night, a group of us would go down to Ybor City in Tampa, which is a little bit like the French Quarter. And every Friday night, there'd be a bunch of Bible beaters. I think they're still there with signs telling everybody how they were going to hell for having lustful thoughts or limp wrists. I'm quoting these signs. I'm not making this up. Basically, you'll be going to hell for all eternity for breathing, among other things. But it was curious, the questions and the reaction that we got from the believers, which we came to call the drunks for Jesus. It's amazing how naive their questions were, how little they knew about atheism. If anything at all, they would ask us the dumbest questions like, gee, you don't believe in anything. How can you go through life not believing in anything? And they couldn't make the leap from the notion that not believing in an invisible deity is the same thing as being a total nihilist. Am I saying that word correctly?
So you're saying you're not a rabid communist, or you don't murder children? And
No, I don't.
I think that also leads to the the definition of us by others, and the definition of a Christian. Most people don't really know what the true definition of a Christian is any more than they know what the true definition of an atheist is. Well, we don't typically have a singular manifesto that defines us and what we think or what we don't think. I think the humanists kind of did that a little bit, didn't they? They created a manifesto, but atheists really don't. We don't wear it on our sleeve, and but by the same token, I notice so many Christians know so little about their own religion that I think if they really understood what it really means to be a Christian, they'd be embarrassed to call themselves one. And I'm kind of amazed more people aren't. But I figure it's because they invent the definition of Christianity tailored to their own ideas about life instead of the other way around. Well, we have a live audience. Let's see if any of them are alive and want to jump into the fray here, come up to the mic and talk to us and tell us what they think about atheism, something that we've said, or why they've become atheists, or even experiences they've had as atheists dealing with Christers. And I see nobody's come forward, so we'll just move ahead. Oh, I beg your pardon.
And make sure that gets on the show, too.
Sure.
Well, my problem with the definition is the word deny. I'm not denying the existence of something. That assumes that it already exists, and I'm just denying it. I assert positively that there is no evidence whatsoever for a God's existence, and that anyone who believes that there is a God is, well, a little bit nuts, maybe more than a little bit, especially in the case of people who blow themselves up thinking they're going to get virgins in heaven or something. So that's my problem with the definition. I think the word deny should be stricken from it, and it should be someone who does not accept any claim of evidence for a God's existence. And I say a God's existence, meaning any God, whatever you want to call it, or even multiple gods.
Now, no doubt you've been confronted with the concept by religionists that atheism in itself is a religion too, with less less substantive, or I think the way they put it is it takes more faith to be an atheist than a Christer, right?
Yeah, I've heard that from people that don't understand logic. They think that you have to prove the non-existence of something to not believe in it. So apparently we have to prove that leprechauns don't exist. We have to prove that the Loch Ness Monster doesn't exist. We have to prove that unicorns don't exist. We have to prove Thor and Zeus and all the other gods that they don't believe in either don't exist. We have to prove all those things in order to be an atheist. And I think they've got it backwards. The burden of the proof is on them. They need to prove they're claiming it exists.
Yeah.
I mean, if I claim that I can run 200 mile an hour, anybody would say, yeah, right, prove it.
Exactly.
And anyone who just accepted that claim would be thought of as an idiot or a fool or...
But that's their premise. Any idea that's posited is possible until it's disproven. There might be a Santa Claus. We just have to really go up there and see for ourselves to be absolutely certain that you got to be kidding me.
There might be. I mean, there might be a planet of Santa Clauses living somewhere, that we haven't discovered yet. There might be, flying spaghetti monsters that inhabit a planet and run around, and there might be unicorns, and there might be all sorts of things, but you don't put out food for unicorns, do you? You don't offer them 10% of your salary because they might exist. And why don't we have churches of the flying spaghetti monster or churches of unicorns? Because they might exist. I mean, it only makes sense to believe in something, or I don't really like the word belief, but it only makes sense to accept something that you've actually got proof for. And something being written down in an old book by people that were, probably out of their mind from heat stroke or something of that sort, or drunk, or under the influence of one drug or another. I mean, and I'm not speaking of any particular religion. I mean, the Indians used to use peyote to believe in their spirit gods, That's just as nuts as Christianity. So, but I think we should just dispense with anything that we don't at least have a high probability of its existence. That's it for me.
Joe, you want to answer up? Well, I look up the word.
Thank you, Brent. I think you covered a lot of territory. I think your points were well taken, but then, of course, I'm prejudiced on the side of atheists, so I can't really be described as totally objective. Nevertheless, it does seem to me that believers seem to put a great deal of importance on proving that atheism is a religion, just like whatever their religion happens to be. To me, that's a rather childish retort, and it's a concession of defeat automatically. The idea being, you're just as foolish as I am because you have a religion too. That seems to be the point they're trying to make, which is rather self-defeating. I see we have another candidate.
Yeah, basically on the subject of proof that you were just discussing, I've had people say to me, well, really, there's no such thing as an atheist because you can't prove there is no God. And I come back to them and say, well, okay, call me what you like. Call me an agnostic if you like, because I can't prove it. But don't think that I think that it's a 50-50 proposition either. Just because I can't prove it, I still am 99.99% positive in my belief that there is no there's no proof, no evidence of any kind of God. They also want to talk about only one God as well, as you are familiar about talking about Pascal's wager, right? They always want to say, well, what does it hurt? What does it hurt to believe? At least that way, if you're wrong, nothing bad will happen to you. However, as we all know, well, what God are you going to pick to believe in of the many, many thousands or millions of gods that have been come into the existence of people's minds? Which one are you going to pick? How in the world are you going to know which one to pick to be right?
Well, the other thing about Pascal's wager that somebody sitting in this audience today pointed out to me once is that it doesn't come at no price to go ahead and accept the belief, which I'd never thought of because I'd never contemplated it, having been a lifelong atheist. But to accept the belief and to live the dogma is a very expensive price to pay to have the belief and to subscribe to it, because of the way it adjusts our whole life and our outlook on the world and our relationship to other people. So to say you might as well just believe it because it doesn't cost you anything to believe, and if you're right, you get your gold star at the end of the day, is a very disingenuous argument to me.
You're absolutely right, because you deal with a lot of shame and guilt.
Yeah.
Throughout your life, and of course all the money that you give to the church, right, is very costly as well. I'm sorry, Joe.
No, it's all right. The word weasel comes to mind. If I can just pretend to believe this and fob myself off on my fellow men or the Almighty who knows my mind already, then I'll be able to squeak into heaven, and the hell with the rest of you. Basically, that's sort of the proposition. But frankly, when someone says to you that it's a matter of belief, that your entire eternal well-being hinges on a matter of belief, frankly, that's just about the most immoral idea ever foisted on the human race in the history of mankind. The idea that I've never met someone who says that people should be punished for what they think. And I'm glad that I never have, because I carry a gun. Nevertheless, there's nothing more immoral than punishing someone for a thought crime, and the entire Abrahamic religions are based on that very idea, that you should be punished unspeakably for all eternity for nothing more serious than a difference of opinion. What is there to worship about that?
I love the definition of belief that we find in the book, which is that to believe is a state or habit of mind in which trust or confidence is placed in some person or thing. Conviction of the truth of some statement or the reality of some being or phenomena, especially when based on examination of evidence. Well, that's what our argument is. We look at the evidence and see that there's no basis for the belief, but it's still a potentially vague term. If we say we believe it's going to rain tomorrow, we don't really know for certain that it will, but we base it on our understanding of a certain amount of science that gives us a reasonable foundation to subscribe to that. So it's not that atheists are completely void of any beliefs. I think it makes more sense to say I presume it's going to rain, or I think it's going to rain, based on the forecast and what I see developing out the window. But I think that when used in the context of religion, it is the idea that you accept something without evidence on a foundation of pride, oddly enough.
As if that's an accomplishment.
Yeah, exactly. As if being a person of deep religious faith is something one should be proud of.
Christopher Hitchens says they call it faith because it's not knowledge.
Good point. Well, let's see what else we got here.
Looks like we have another speaker.
Yes.
Well, it seems to me that part of the problem with persuasion of religious believers is that their belief, I think, largely rests upon the assumption that there is an adequate object to religious attitudes. That is, attitudes of self-deprecation, attitudes of obedience, and all the things that are traditionally associated with religion. And you can demonstrate the lack of logical connection between the so-called creator God and all the science that we now have that demonstrates that this biblically based image is without any kind of rational basis. Science, everything we know about the world that we find ourselves in, wholly contradicts the creation view. But the sense is, for most believers, is largely emotional, and it arises from family relationships. The patriarchal God, for instance, the great father who will take care of us, is, I think, a fundamental reference point for a lot of believers. And this is a good deal more difficult to confront, to deal with, than the obvious lack of any rational, logical, and scientific basis. So how do atheists, therefore, deal with, or have we adequately dealt with, this this whole emotional and social context to religious believers?
You know, there's a lot of, I don't even think backlash, excuse me, I don't even think backlash is the right word, but there's a lot of press about the aggressive atheists like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett. Not so much Sam Harris anymore. But the idea that they're just like any missionary. They evangelize, only they evangelize atheism rather than belief. Again, it's the comparison between atheism and religion, as if atheism seems to resemble religion, then it must be bad. This is a hell of an argument to make from the point of a believer, and I agree with them on that point. So, nevertheless, there is a backlash to this. I saw an article on the net just last week that the new atheism is dead. It's already going away. I don't happen to think that's true, but that's neither here nor there. I don't want to discuss the article. But it's something that we have to contend with, again, as atheists, the idea that what really amounts to self-defense is a form of proselytization, and truthfully it is. Of course it is. The more people who come around to our way of thinking, the more clout we have, financial and political, and every form. So it would please me if we lived in a more secular country than we do, and I think of it as sort of my mission to reduce the amount of superstition in this country, to bring us to a more realistic point of view, to a more atheistic point of view, not just in politics, but in morality as well, because the atheist point of view is far more moral than the religious point of view. I'm not good because I think I'm going to be rewarded or punished. I'm good because I think it's worthwhile for its own sake. That's the true morality. Morality with a gun to your head is quite the opposite.
Well, let me ask you this, Joe. In various social movements that we've experienced in our lifetimes, beginning toward the, I guess, second half of the 20th century, these movements caught on because more and more people came out into the open and declared that they were proponents of women's rights or proponents of same-sex marriage. But atheists haven't really come out of the closet en masse, and I wonder if you think that we may be on the doorstep of that happening. I think we have one professed atheist in Congress. We start hearing about mostly Hollywood types coming out claiming they're atheists and getting away with it, not seeing their careers go down in flames and shambles. You think we're getting closer to the point where we don't really need to hide our atheism at the risk of losing employment or housing, so on. Dawkins may be a leader in that, Dawkins and Hitchens.
I'm sure it varies rather wildly depending on a person's situation. I wouldn't want to come out as a vocal atheist and expect to go right up the ladder at Chick-fil-A. And nevertheless, people are coming out more and more every day. There's an active campaign, the Out campaign, which, unlike the gay campaign, no one gets outed without their own permission, or they out themselves. A lot of gays were outed by other gays or by other people against their will. That's not the case with the atheist out forum, although I think if I had someone that I knew was an atheist and they were making large religious noises in the legislature, it might be a temptation to say something. I can't say what I would do in that circumstance, but the statistics show that particularly among the young, the non-believers and the unaffiliated are growing rapidly to the highest numbers in history. And once it starts, it's like anything going downhill, it'll pick up steam.
Do you think there to be a landmark today that Boy Scouts allow atheists?
I think they will before they allow gays. You know, that's a tough question, though, because in speaking to gays who are atheists, they, to a man or woman or person, have said, no, the religious discrimination has always been greater than the discrimination for their sexual orientation.
Wow. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
I don't know that I can offer any light on a definition of atheism in the dictionary sense. Functionally, for me, it's a stepping stone or a threshold to sanity. Functionally, I'm an anti-theist. I've always accepted as a dictionary definition of atheism simply someone who is without a belief in gods, or more broadly, the supernatural. Not that he is against that belief. However, also functionally, I would regard myself as an anti-theist. I think all the evidence we have in our own society and others is that the supernatural belief systems are projections of our wishes. And these belief systems have flourished and spread much in the way that language is spread. You can almost duplicate ethnographic and linguistic maps that change over time. It is so evidently all our religions are human-made. And I think that when we atheists sometimes seem to think that we are the brightest among us all, and that's how we reach our conclusions. I've decided that's not true. There's just as wide a mix of intelligence among us as amongst even possibly the general population, and certainly among the educated population. Somehow we have managed to get through the accumulated propaganda of thousands of years of our social belief systems. Our enemy probably isn't even the specific belief systems, but the fact that people are inhabited by all the emotional needs that these encrusted belief systems satisfy, and all our rational attacks at theism are perhaps even beside the point. So our atheism is a gateway to a more positive approach to the reformation of our societies. Many of us, when we lose our faith, inside quotes, are angry that we have been conned so thoroughly by the system. We have many, many thoroughly flummoxed ex-clergy among our midst. Young people, high school age, are a particularly fallow ground for us to find new atheists, and I hope that atheists will, again, as we have in the past, we atheists here, try to infiltrate the high schools. Those people, when they go into college, may continue to be atheists. They may become humanists and have a positive program to substitute for these belief systems. Even so, unfortunately, functionally, we are simply providing fuel and energy in a process that's going to take ages to complete throughout the now 7 billion of us on Earth, of whom about 40%, about 3 billion, are monotheists, another billion or more are polytheists, and the rest, who knows what. I am not as encouraged as some of us are by the increasing number of so-called nuns, because they may have, I suspect that our esteemed President of the United States is actually a nun. But to get along in his position of authority and influence, he has to subscribe to the common belief system. There are so many of us, I think, in that category. Us, I mean whole human people. So I hope that we continue to attract younger people into our midst and feed them into a positive belief system, whether it's humanism or whether even our atheism becomes somewhat less negating and aggressive at deflating this ugly balloon of our own predominant Christian belief system. It's just embarrassing ugly how people can calm themselves, pardon my own anger. And I am so happy to be in what I have always regarded primarily for me as a haven away from the insanity that exists all around me. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Steve. I want to make a point about atheism as a belief system. Everybody here is an atheist. I don't know about in the audience worldwide, or globally, but you all know as well as I do that being an atheist has nothing whatsoever to do with having a moral system. It's not a statement of ethics or morals. It's no more a belief system than if you said, well, I don't believe in the Easter Bunny. There's no belief system that follows a disbelief in Easter bunnies. On the other hand, the Easter Bunny is not held up as being a source of divine morality, a source of inspiration, and a source whose commandments must be followed. So while becoming an atheist doesn't necessarily entail having a moral system, it really does force you to examine the moral system that you've been given by whatever religion you're about to disassociate yourself from, or if you've never been a religious person, you had to find a moral system somewhere else. And so you begin to look at moral systems not based on the fact that this is unquestionable because it's divinely sent, but because it's either a good idea or a bad idea. That's why I am so very much into secularism, because it allows us to make logical decisions based on reason and what's best for the person and persons as a group, not based on some ideological edict that you can't avoid one way or the other. It says we have to stone them, let's stone them, whether we want to or not. Makes no sense. So atheism does force you to question moral systems and to begin to find one, a better one. But frankly, as Ingersoll once said, just because I've freed you from slavery doesn't mean that I'm required to get you a job.
Well, we're about halfway through the program. We're going to take a moment to talk a little about Atheists of Florida. So if those of you in the audience want to get up and stretch for a minute, if our engineer wants to refill his scotch glass, that's fine, because we want our audience to know about Atheists of Florida, what membership entails, what we do, some of the kind of reasons we're here. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about the preponderance of religion in the less educated and more impoverished cultures of the world. And I want to talk about the difference between atheism and agnosticism. So maybe some of our audience can think about how they might want to talk about that a little bit. But Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization. We were founded in 1992. We are the real McCoy. We're the real deal. There are many imposters, but we are the Atheists of Florida. We publish a quarterly newsletter. It looks like this. And some fun publications. I think one of the most commonly recovered from our tables, our outreach events, are our contrast between the 10 Commandments and the Bill of Rights. And I held that up backwards, but here are the 10 Commandments. And on the other side, the Bill of Rights. Now, we're told frequently, Joe, that by some of these national pundits who come on some of the network programs, that they firmly believe that our democracy and all of our civil rights come to us as a result of the Christian religion. And we say, if that's so, why is there so much contradiction between our Bill of Rights and the commandments, one of which offers you rights, your protections against a government that has power over you, the other one that is commandments, not suggestions, but you do this or you suffer serious consequences.
If that's so, it fails to answer the question as to why, if you lived by the Old Testament strictly, you'd be extremely fortunate to escape the death penalty. And if you live by the New Testament, you'd be very fortunate to escape an insane asylum. So I hardly think that our Constitution is based on the morality and the laws of the Bible.
Well, we can send these to you electronically or printed on paper if you contact us at Atheist Forum at AOL.com. Our program comes to you from Tampa, Florida. And we have a website, Atheists of Florida Incorporated. We offer membership. We offer legal assistance. A lot of times people question whether or not they need to put up with religious intrusion in their lives when they work for corporations or governments. And if you question that, we have real attorneys who have passed the Florida bar, who can consult with you about that to see whether or not you have a case. We had one person write to us from a local company, but they didn't tell us what the company was, so we couldn't respond. Besides that, we have monthly meetings, meetups. Some of these are potluck meetings, and we do these webcasts, and we go to outreach events around the state where we bring our table full of other handouts, our newsletters, allow the public to come along and meet us, talk to us face-to-face, and find out more about Atheists of Florida. So we invite you to visit our website or write to us at the Atheist Forum to find out more about Atheists of Florida. But I think the most important thing to stress, Joe, is that it's entirely a volunteer-run organization. None of us take any pay compensation. The only one that's in it for the money is Joe, and he hasn't done well so far.
It's not working out the way I planned.
So let's get back to the program. Thanks for being with us here on the Atheist Forum. The Onion's definition of atheism is, I'll make this a little easier to read.
Are we actually going to take a break?
We just did. That was it. What, you want to get him to take a break? Go ahead, take a break. I'll take over.
Okay.
Atheism is defined as the rejection of a belief in the existence of God, in which one deeply devotes oneself to the nearly non-stop studying, writing, thinking, and talking about God. Upon reaching the philosophical and logical conclusion that God cannot exist, an atheist will dedicate the rest of his or her life to poring over books about God, fervently arguing with those who believe in God, and meeting with other devout atheists to discuss God or listen to someone lecture passionately and at length about how there is no God. The firmly held belief that there is no God gives atheists a deep sense of purpose and meaning in their lives. Well, I don't know about you, but that kind of inadvertently became me, I think, mainly because so many people walk into our meetings and say, gee, I thought I was the only one. I just want to be around other people who also are able to reject religion and still have a stable foundation for their lives. And that's one of the things that we offer here. It's not so much that we're focused on criticizing religion, much as it might seem like it, but in advancing the positive aspects of the atheist lifestyle, being able to decide our own ethics for ourselves and not having somebody tell us what they're supposed to be, and being able to live our lives free of the guilt and the dogma and the issues that plague those who are religious in an increasingly complex society. I see somebody's ready to jump in here. Jim, are you just going to get a cup of coffee? Okay, fine. So, but I do hear sometimes atheism defined almost in terms of what really is the definition of an agnostic when I hear other atheists in our organization talk about it. They say something to the effect that we just don't know, or we can't know whether or not there is a God. So, seeing no evidence, I live my life free of the attendant dogma that religion imposes on us. Well, I think, isn't that the exact definition of agnosticism? We have somebody who's going to tell me why I'm looking at this inside out.
Well, I just wanted to remind you that religion does provide a stable foundation for your life. It's built on horse manure. So what could be more stable? That is all.
Sinkhole.
Thank you very much.
Good. But I think that really, I think as atheists, we really do need to nail that definition down a little more firmly, as that we understand that gods don't exist, and all of the gods are just made up as explanations for things that our ancestors didn't understand. I think we've outgrown gods. I think we really have, especially in the industrial nations, in the educated world, and I think also that somebody will probably stand up and statistically verify that among the nations in this world that have less education and higher rates of poverty, even within regions of our own country, you have a higher incidence of religious belief as opposed to the nations that have higher educational standards.
Nigeria has the highest percentage of believers and is at the top of the
I think they're second,
most corrupt countries on earth every year.
Aren't they second only to the state of Mississippi, John? I think.
Something like that.
But I even noticed that too. The red states, the conservative states, are the states that have the strongest or highest percentages of religious believers, along with the highest rates of teen pregnancy, divorce, and maybe the highest occupancy of aluminum living quarters, right? I'm not sure how to put that tactfully. Jim?
Well, thank you. I take another crack at it, I suppose. I have here in my hand a list. It's called The Consumer's Guide to 9 Practical Benefits of Atheism. And if you will allow,
The floor is yours.
I will digress along those lines. Number one consumer benefit: abandoning rigid, religiously dictated dietary codes and fasting regimes. The cuisine of the entire world is now open to you to sample anytime without restriction. Something religions can't seem to quite offer. Isn't that nice? Benefit number 2: you get to keep all of your money. No more tithing. You get to decide what public goods and causes are worth supporting. Number 3, no more corrosive guilt about violating silly, archaic, and pointless religious codes of personal behavior. The insights of common morality and ethics gleaned from centuries of everyday social practice and human experience and empathy are fully sufficient to guide our ethical perspectives. Wear what you want. Without a god dictating fashion choices, you can discard styles of clothing designed to keep group cohesiveness centered on dictatorial authorities. Express yourself.
In other words, you don't have to wear those horrid, ugly black drapes.
All those things, and the funny-looking hats, and all the jewelry, and all the other nonsense that goes along with that. Number 5, you may decide to sleep in on so-called Sabbath days. Religious holy days are just ordinary days like any other. Fill them with joyful living instead of prayerful supplication. Why waste your time? No need to fight wars over holy real estate. Universal adoption of atheism means that people everywhere can settle their apparent disagreements on a rational and fair-minded basis in ways that will enlarge the potential for happiness, and in full respect for the human rights of every person. We are very lucky in our time to have access to something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, sponsored by the United Nations. And these sorts of declarations, the ever-expanding notion of what human rights are, is what really spells freedom for our species. But in order to get to that freedom, you have to abandon religion. Number 7, whether or not you are a member of a minority group, you can see that everyone is a member of the human family and worthy of your respect, as you are worthy of theirs. There are no godly, chosen, righteous, or special people. Number 8, all the insights of science and technology are now open to you. Benefits to human life become the principal criteria as to what ideas and practices are adapted for common use. Science is free to discover the realities of our world and ourselves without hindrance or the necessity to avoid offending religious sensibilities. And one can think of many, many scientific breakthroughs, such as stem cell research. They require the freedom to do it, and there are lots of religious folks out there who want to prevent you from doing it because it undermines their wholly fallacious claims. And last but certainly not least, you may read or write all of the forbidden books you want. In a secular world, freedom of expression has genuine meaning. Authoritarian religions cannot veto the ideas of free people. No subject is off limits. Universal respect for the essential humanity of others opens up new possibilities for finding understanding, humor, aesthetic appreciation, and the joy of life. And this then constitutes, I think, a list, at least a partial list anyway, of adequate reasons to consider atheism as a major point from which you can live your life. And I think Joe was right when he said that atheism is a point. It's one thing, but it's the most important and crucial thing for all of us who have been brought up in a religious environment.
That's the launching point.
Yes.
Thank you, Jim.
Well, before economic issues came to the forefront of our diversity of opinion in this country, it seemed that almost everything that was divisive in our culture was founded on religious foundations and issues, and it was, for years the most divisive basis for the conflict of opinion in our culture.
It's considered in poor taste to even discuss religion, let alone politics, in almost any circumstance. I find that interesting because it closes off criticism of religious belief. And if you're not going to talk about religion, that really leaves you one other option. You can fight about it. I'd much rather talk about it. So it's universally recognized that talking about religion is a good starting point for incredible conflicts, even talking about it. You would think that the Almighty would know this. However, if you read the last chapter of Matthew, it tells us that you have to go forth and evangelize and convert everybody in the whole world to Christianity, the Great Commission, it's called. It's almost impossible to get two people to agree on the subject of religion, let alone the whole world. It's a black mark against the deity that he would provide us with a formula that guarantees nothing but a continuous conflict for all eternity over who actually is the right religion. So it's a formula for constant warfare, constant conflict, constant battles. Yet we're commanded by the deity to do it. But good idea.
And isn't that the same admonition in the Koran?
And sell your cloak and buy a sword. Good advice.
Yeah, and don't the Muslims say the same thing? They have the commandment to convert everybody to their religion,
yes,
or destroy them.
Yes.
We prefer to just stand back and watch the mayhem, leave us out of it. We're the atheists. We're probably the first ones to get, because it could be universally agreed by all religions that those dirty little heathen atheists we could have gotten rid of first, right?
Given a choice, I would prefer to say positive things about atheism. But it's hard to do that without at the same time comparing it to the competition, which of course is belief. And so it's virtually impossible to say positive things about atheism without being critical of belief, or at least examining it objectively, if not critically. I always like to point out the 14th Psalm, the first chapter, which tells us quite clearly what believers think of us, which is that we're an abortion, we're an abomination, we are evil, we do no good, not one. So if I said that, it also says that we're fools. If I said that about Christians, I'd be ridden out of town on a rail. Yet they say it about me all the time, and it repeats itself in the 53rd chapter in case you think it was an accident. Next.
even though it's true.
Yeah.
So, well, I have to disagree with a little bit, Jim, about the freedom. You know, we don't exactly have the freedom to eat anything we want. I mean, eating babies, I've heard that we're accused of that a lot, but I don't really think any atheist that I know of approves of eating babies. You know,
Indigestion.
well, it's actually the religious believers that started the baby eating thing, because they invented the devil and insisted the devil wanted human sacrifices and babies. So, but you're not free to eat babies, so you don't have total freedom. Same thing with freedom to wear stuff, or not to wear stuff, because if you run down the street naked, you're going to get in trouble in almost every place that I know of, and of course that's because religion, of course, has placed these strictures on society, and even though we supposedly live in a secular country that supposedly doesn't have any laws that, force other people's religious beliefs on us, well, the fact that I have to wear clothes when I walk down the street is somebody's religious morality being forced on me. So people often ask me, well, if you're an atheist and you just don't believe in God, well, why do you bother talking about it? And, why don't you just keep to yourself? And I say, well, if religion would do the same thing, that'd be fine with me. I mean, if your religion causes you to believe that there's a giant spaghetti monster living in your front yard and you have to go out every morning and prostrate yourself in front of him and, bow down and whatever, and do that naked, I don't really care, because that doesn't bother me. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't pick my pocket, as Jefferson would say, So as long as people kept their beliefs to themselves, I would be fine with it. The problem is they don't. Once you get a religion, the next step, the very next step, is
impose it on everybody.
Impose it on everybody. It's not just that I believe this. Everybody has to believe it.
They're commanded to by the last chapter of Matthew.
Well, but the reason why? Because they know, deep down inside, they know it's nonsense. And the only way they can convince themselves that they're not being absolute and utter fools is if they can get other people to say, no, your nonsense isn't nonsense, I believe it too.
Exactly.
Atheists don't need that reinforcement.
And don't you think that's why atheism is often identified by them as just another religion?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because that way everybody's subscribing to one religion or another, just which one you happen to pick. You're picking the wrong one, I know the right one, right?
Oh, yeah. It's always funny. I call it, bullshit versus bullshit when you have two religions. I think we can say that. We're on the internet, so.
Okay.
Bullshit versus bullshit. When one religion sits there and calls another religion bullshit. It's kind of like they're both right, because that's all of them are. It's just nonsense, and they need reinforcement, constant reinforcement. They have to go to church every week. They have to do Bible studies. They have to make references to it on money, on the pledge. The more references they have, the more it reinforces that they're not being fools. And they need that because they are.
Yeah, and I think that's the foundation of their hostility against those of us who are able to live fulfilled lives without this dogma intruding in our lives and all things that were just reviewed. We're able to make our own decisions instead of having to subscribe to ancient dogma about how we live, and that gives us a sense of freedom that they don't enjoy, and they want us to sort of bring us down to where they are. Last chance, we're running out of time. Any of you who haven't stepped up to the plate yet, opportunities knocking. Some of the future programs we might talk about here, besides having live call-in programs, might be vouchers. Are vouchers good for us or not? Education vouchers I'm talking about. We're going to have Ryan Cragen, I think, come in. We met him at the Coalition of Reason function, the Darwin Day deal, which is another thing that the Atheists of Florida is mixed up in. Also, I think I'd like to have our next speaker do a program sometime and tell us how much she knows about Christianity, because she spent a great deal of her young life involved in the Bible school and knows a lot of things about religion that most people simply wouldn't believe is a part of Christianity. It's a good way to pick up some pin money at a bar, get them to bet you, because they're just sure it isn't there. Go ahead, Nan.
Yes, we were talking about freedom. And as we all know, freedom also has its other side. And that's been one of the strengths of the religionists, actually, is the lack of freedom. If we look at freedom, we don't have all the answers, and that's come up today. Science is still finding out many answers. But for most of your religionists, not all, but the majority of them, they have all the answers right here. Anything that you can bring up, they have the answer to it. And so that's been one of the big strengths of religion. They don't ever have to say, I don't know. And those are three very powerful words, because none of us does know everything.
Right. So religion allows them to simplify complex social issues. Everything's either right or wrong.
Exactly.
Everything's black and white.
And even science, they can ignore that because the scientists might come up, not necessarily completely reverse themselves, but as we learn more, then we adjust to that. Whereas the religionist says, oh no, it was God who created the world, and this happened thusly. And even though we proved through history, archaeology, and science that didn't happen.
Right.
So freedom does set us free to not know, but it also gives us freedom to go ahead.
You're absolutely right. I hope we've given you some really constructive things to think about here on the Atheist Forum, and I hope you'll visit our website so you can get to links to other programs we'll do at Atheists of Florida Incorporated.org. Along with Joe Reinhardt, I'm Ed Golly for Atheists of Florida, reminding you, if the story seems just a little too implausible to be true,
Don't believe it just because someone wrote it down.
Make them prove it!